Welcome to the Overcome University podcast. I'm your host, Michael Allison. Today's guest is Alex Edwards. He's a retired lieutenant colonel, and he's here to tell us about his story of serving in the Air Force, some of the challenges he's faced in life and while serving. I can't wait to get into his story. Let's go. Hey, Alex, thank you so much for being a guest on the Overcome University podcast, man. It's a pleasure to have you here, brother.
Man, I appreciate the opportunity, man. So thank you for having me as a guest.
Absolutely, man. So I love the fact to have you here as a guest, man, because I remember meeting you and we were playing golf through our mutual friend. And now I'm here having you as a guest is truly an honor because while I was out there on that golf course, I learned so much about you, learned so much about your career. And you're very humble about the stories and things that you've done, man. So I'm glad for you to come on here and just to tell the world and share a little bit about yourself, man. Some of the things that you've been through in life, man.
Definitely. So I'm ready to get started.
So you just recently retired, and that's not a small feat. That's a super accomplishment that a lot of people dream to and aspire to. Can you tell us a little about like what does it feel like doing your service, serving our country, and just retiring, man? What does that feel like?
Well, it's a good weight lifted off my shoulders, first off. But it was a roller coaster that, got me to at least do one of the things that I dreamed about most, and that was flying planes. And then the challenging aspect of, being commissioned and then being an officer and the expectations of leading. And then when it comes to balancing all those things, trying to be successful, trying to be a father, trying to be, a husband, and then being content with where you at least made it and achieved, and seeing all those things come together and being ready to like say, okay, I've done what I wanted. I now have other priorities that I want to move on to, and being content with that. So it's been good.
That's awesome, man. Well, congratulations once again. I want to like step back a little bit with your story, though. If you can, tell us a little bit about where did this dream and this aspiration started from? I can think about for myself as a kid, all the things that I wanted to be, and for you to live that out and to actually become a pilot. Can you tell us a little bit about where that aspiration came from?
Yeah, most definitely. And the most random things that happened when I was just before the age of 10, it was a random Saturday that my dad he had wanted to take me to this air show that was in the neighboring town. And at that point, I had seen airplanes, but had never experienced anything like it. So it was impromptu. It was just he and I, just the two of us. And we went there that day. And when I saw like just the aerobatics and then the military planes that were there, to me, that was the coolest thing that I had seen. I liked the loud sound of the jet engines. I liked all the rolls and all the flips and all the stuff that I was getting to see it, and then how fast and all that was. And so that looked to be more fun than any roller coaster ride I had ever been on. So that was the thing that got me hooked, man. And it's never changed ever since.
Man, that's awesome, man. Can you tell me a little bit about where you grew up and what was that like for you with your upbringing?
Well, I don't have a history of military members in my family at all. So when I saw the military planes, it was just something different that I wanted to do from anything that anyone around had seen and been exposed to. And so kind of being against the grain, wanting to do something that was different, is that can be a big hurdle for people to accept. And so that's one of the things as far as a small town is concerned. And then not having anybody else to really fall back on that's done it. So you find yourself having to go out and find people outside of your small town, get educated, from people at the neighboring airports or even books, because the internet was not really that big of a thing back then.
Right.
So you had to know how to drive, had to get places where those type of people did exist, and kind of do your own research. So that was a challenge being in a small town.
As you're saying that, I thought about myself. When I was in high school, I didn't have any parent or anyone that served in the Marine Corps or did any of those things that I was aspiring to do. And to step out there in regards to like faith and stuff like that, can you tell us a little bit more about like you put in that due diligence in regards to like doing the research and getting all the information that you needed to get to say this is the career path that I wanted to go about?
This will be one of the things that I attribute to my parents and my guardians kind of helping me, or at least encouraging me to be where I am. My parents were pretty strict. I'll just go ahead and say that. But even without a military background, they kept a close hold on, hey, making sure you do school, your grades are good. Hey, I don't want you hanging out late, you know. And so I got told no a lot growing up,
Mm-hmm.
to the point where I didn't think yes was in the vocabulary of my mouth. The thing that I will say that they never said no to is when I provided them or presented them with something different. Like when I said, hey, I'm thinking, what about flying? They kind of were caught off guard and were like, you sure you want to do that? That's dangerous. But they never said no to something that I actually brought to them as far as an idea or something I was dreaming about. And so that in itself was the thing that kind of helped, keep my imagination and keep my aspirations open, to where they said, okay, well, tell us how you're going to do it. And then if it makes sense, then we'll support you. And so the fact that they didn't tell me no to things like that, and that they were my biggest fans, that kind of helped me break out of that small town mentality, if you will.
I want to, if you could elaborate a little bit, how did that resonate with like your peers and your siblings when you tell them that, hey, I want to be a pilot?
Well, to them, they were it was very similar as far as their mentality on, well, I don't know anybody that does that. That just sounds crazy that you want to do that. And in the beginning, I didn't look at it as something that was discouraging.
Mm-hmm.
It was just something that, okay, you've never seen it. Well, then that just makes me want to do it even more, so I can show you that, hey, somebody can actually do it. And that if you do see that, then maybe you'll at least open your imagination that something like this does exist. So it just kind of challenged me to not really prove them wrong, because they didn't think I couldn't do it, but at least prove them that, hey, it could be done.
Right. So I've seen all of the movies in regards to like guys want to be pilots and things like that. But if you could speak to it a little bit about what it was it like as a first generation pilot and a military officer getting enlisted and actually going through this entire process, because I know that you have to do certain types of tests and all of these different levels that you have to even get to for someone to even say yes. And I know that there could be even like some different barriers to entry and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about you actually going through the process and actually someone saying now you can start flying jets? What were some challenges and obstacles that you actually faced throughout this entire process?
The first obstacle is, before I got commissioned, I had to have a college degree. And so I did well in high school to get into college. But once I got to college, I didn't have a lot of scholarships. So finances in college was the first obstacle, to where I couldn't stay in school to graduate, and I couldn't stay in ROTC if I didn't get school paid for that. So that I had to find and search under every rock on trying to find scholarships to apply for, grants that I can get. And so my first year, I was trying to piecemeal just enough money to stay in school. And once that happened, I eventually did get on scholarship, and that helped out. The second was, just being an ROTC was not enough. You had to compete for a pilot training slot. And if you didn't get that pilot training slot, then it's a moot point on trying to even be a pilot, or have to find some other avenue. So you have to be academically sound. You have to be physically sound. You talked about the physicals. You got to pass the military physical fitness challenges. And then you have to go to military training and do well at that. And so this is a case where I felt like if I could do everything in my power to put all those balls in my court, then I at least wanted to give myself an opportunity to be competitive. And I was. And so that second hurdle was actually qualifying and then getting the pilot training slot. And then the third was, now that I'm at flight training, I wanted to fly the F-15C. And so it's a badass fighter. And back in the 90s and the early 2000s, it was the premier fighter in the Air Force. And they the Air Force in general said, hey, our best pilots will fly the F-15C. So naturally I said, well, I want to be the best pilot, so I want to fly the F-15C. So it was a year long, they call it undergraduate pilot training, but it was a graduate level course, to be honest.
Uh-huh.
And so competing for 365 days, that in itself, 7 days of studying along with flying, that means early mornings, getting up to prepare for your flights, prepare for your test, late nights doing the same thing just to make sure it's fresh in your mind. But that third big hurdle, competing to get into that fighter, was to me a milestone, and I didn't want to leave any stone unturned to make sure I was competitive, and I ultimately did receive that F-15C.
Congratulations, man.
Yeah.
I want to touch on something that I think it's a topic, if you're okay with talking about it, as from my experience. When I served in the Marines, I noticed officer ranks would be more so of Caucasians. And you're an African-American man that's among the elite of the elites when it comes to flying pilots, as I would see that in regards to like the Air Force. And you just mentioned that to fly F-15Cs, you have to be one of the elites to fly that. Did you ever experience anything when it comes to being in that group or that upper echelon where you may be looked up on as in like you don't belong here? And did you have to face anything like that? Any challenges like that?
Of course, most definitely. Even before the F-15C, and I'll talk about that, going to pilot training for Black folks that look like, or other folks that look like me, and mostly Black, for some reason, there was a high washout rate or failure rate in pilot training. So when I showed up day one, I remember overhearing, some of the instructors, he's going to be the next washout, before I ever even got in the cockpit. And it wasn't because they knew anything about me other than what I looked like.
Wow.
And so I felt like from day one, I was starting in the hole, and I had to climb myself out of the hole just based on expectations. And then once I was in the F-15C community at that, flying that first fighter, it had always been, and like you said, most officers are Caucasian, they're white. And so I knew that I was naturally going to be thrust and be a minority, wherever
Right.
I was going. So several units, I was the only Black pilot. And so it was the same thing where I showed up, and the first day I walked in, people didn't assume I was a pilot. They thought I was a maintenance officer because only the only Black officers they had seen were the ones that were maintenance officers.
Right.
And so the expectation at that time, not only did they look at me and perceive me to be something different, but they also, okay, well, he's here, but is he actually going to be a decent wingman, when it comes to actually flying the jet?
Mm-hmm.
And so much so to where in the first year, I remember a pilot that said, I was put in charge of one of the organizations that we had in our unit. And so that meant even as a young junior officer, I had to still tell some older officers what to do, or, how to get in line or how to do certain things. And this guy called me out and was like, I know you're younger ranking than me, but since when does a white guy ever listen to a Black guy? And that caught me off guard when I heard that. And so that was one of the first overt things that was ever said that let me know, like, I'm still going to be dealing with this for a while, but it was not anything that I let thwart me from leading and projecting. So how I overcame that is you got to understand, the bounds of what people are allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do, and then be willing to call people out immediately. Because what I allow and what I let people do and what they get away with, it's only going to mean that it's acceptable and it's okay. So what I learned early on is calling people out and just not letting them take advantage of me being a junior officer or me being a Black officer nonetheless. And that ultimately got me where, my reputation and that respect, whether you liked me or not is one thing, but whether you respect me, that's always going to be the case.
Alex, man, that's so profound for you to be able to express that, stand on that, and hold your own. I would like to ask you if you could, overcoming these types of stereotypes, prejudice, and some of these systematic like perspectives, can you talk? That's no small feat. Can you talk to our audience if they were facing something like this right now in their lives or in their career, what advice would you give to a listener about your experience?
Trying to think of how to sum it up. Um, One of the big things I'll say is history, and I'll in some later topics I'll talk about history, but I think it's important to understand history. And when I say understand history, and I'll just speak to it from a military sense, I do look at the Tuskegee Airmen as one of the things that I revere a lot, because I can't fathom what happened in the 40s and 50s, and what adversity they went through. Imagine, us going through that today. It's something that's just unimaginable. But I understand that, in that, had they not persevered through a lot of that, and had not at least kept that desire, then I wouldn't probably be sitting here talking to you now from the seat. And so I understand that history. I respect that history, and I take that and I try to stand on the shoulders of them to try to make sure that I don't be the guy that quit and throw in the towel. So understanding history from that perspective is one thing that I'll say. Not only understanding history, I'll say it's important to make sure your boundaries, or those lines that should not be crossed, especially as a Black person and a minority, that you clearly define those and delineate those. And what you allow is what people will continue to do. And so, whether you're a junior enlisted personnel or whether you're a junior officer, no one that outranks you, no one that's older than you should ever cross those lines of disrespect, or anything that's going to be deemed as, um, I say, racially motivated. And so, you have the ability. You just need to know the bounds of what people are allowed and what you won't allow as it relates to you. And if you stand on that, whether you know the law, whether you understand the UCMJ, at a minimum, you can always draw that line, and they'll know it and they'll respect it, hopefully. And that'll at least be the initial place to start as a minority or Black person in the military.
Absolutely. I love the fact that, to me, you're truly inspiring. I look at you as a trailblazer too, as well, just from hearing your story. And as you were telling me that, and you're sharing the story of the history, I think of when someone was telling me that people prior to me, they had to crawl, then they had to walk, then they had to jog, then they had to start running and things like that. And that's how I kind of like hear your story, and respecting that and understanding there's much more deeper rooted things to this than just what you may see on the surface level.
Mm.
I want to ask you, in the face of these circumstances and these situations, I get that that could happen while you're in the workplace and all that is going on. Privately, when you're back with your family and you're back at your place, and something like this has just recently occurred to you, how does one cope or deal with or handle these types of things too? As in, I could see, or I've heard from other people, when they may have been treated a certain way, they go back home and they're depressed, they have anxiety, they have frustration, and they start second guessing themselves. Should I even go back to work and show up to these places and things like that? Can you talk a little bit or elaborate a little bit on what you just said, I guess, in regards to the family dynamics and the family aspects of things, in regards to people that are supporting you and continue to push you to keep going and keep on thriving towards your goal and towards your dreams?
Uh, Definitely. I will tell you, none of that is easy. And so, if it sounds like it's easy when I'm sitting here talking about it, I'll be the first to admit it's not. Um, I remember early on where, something happened, and it I was hot, I was heated, and I remember not being able to vent at that point. And this
Hmm.
is early on in my career where I wasn't as vocal. And I remember going home, and talking with my wife, and being in tears that, I can't believe in freaking 2007 that something like this still exists.
Hmm.
And so, honestly, having my wife to be able to talk to and be my sounding board, to be able to vent and have, you know, that ability to at least get that emotional release off. And then being able to rationally decide, like, how am I going to navigate it? You know, those are things that I had to learn early on to be able to be in the position that I'm in now. But having someone that's a support system to be able to do that, because I can tell you I wasn't the man that I am now. You know, I was younger, I was influential. So having someone, whether it's a friend, whether it's a spouse, someone that you can actually open up to, and then someone that's going to be able to help you navigate what is a good course of action to
Mhm.
take. So it's important to have somebody to fall back on, to at least go back and get that release, because definitely you'll need it at times.
Absolutely. So you just retired, and I recall from like your story that you have no regrets. And for one to actually finish their careers, like I only did 8 years in the Marine Corps, but I know that many guys do serve, but they don't finish, right?
Hmm.
So, in regards to like your story and one to cross the finish line and retired, can you talk to us about what pushed you to continue to reenlist and to continue to persevere and actually see your goals and see your dreams come true?
Um, about As a pilot, I can tell you right now, especially an Air Force pilot, you have a 10-year commitment, which is longer than a lot of, like, reenlistments. And so when I was at that halfway point and I was just finishing up my 10-year commitment, it was happening just after the 2008 election. And I'm sure you remember
Yeah.
when President Obama and that whole time span. So after that, there was a lot of overt racism that started to happen in the military. And so it was so much so that it was starting to frustrate me on whether or not I want to stay in and serve another 10 or 11 years. And so when I got to that point, one of the pivotal moments was, um, one of my commanders had brought me into their office. It was actually the wing commander, I'll just say. So the base commander. Um, I was a pretty good officer. I was a pretty good pilot. I performed pretty well, but all I was really doing was flying at that point. And so he had surprisingly called me into the office, set up a meeting, and I was like, man, the base commander wants to chat with me. And so it was pivotal because what he said was, he was like, hey, Count, that's what they call me as far as my calls. He's like, Count, he's like, what are your plans for the next few years? And I was like, I don't know, sir. I was like, if I can be frank, I'm honestly undecided whether or not I want to be in the military, because I was starting to get frustrated with all the kind of the racial things that were happening. And I was like, I shouldn't be in an environment where I have to deal with that. But he said, hey, have you really considered whether or not you were on a path to be in my seat, to be a commander or to be a leader? And at that point, I had not really given it a lot of thought. And so I was like, not really. I just thought about flying. And so he then proceeded to say, hey, look at all the people that you lead now from your flight commander position. You're the instructor pilot of the year. You're voted best IP by your students. Um, you're the flight commander of the quarter, and you're competing for the wing. He's like, so it appears that you actually have the ability to lead. And I think from your position, and he made point that I was black. He said, I think from your position, you have a lot more that you can offer. He's like, so I want you to think about this. He's like, based on everything that I see, he was like, you have a lot of potential and you can do these things, but it's just a matter of whether you want to pursue them, and then think about the people you can influence. And so to me, that was the thing that I was like, okay. And I thought of, the military outside of myself and outside of just flying, still wanting to fly, but how I can actually use my position to empower others. And that to me gave me a bigger sense of purpose. So that's how I continue.
Man, I love the fact that someone did that for you. As you were telling me that, I recalled when I was in Japan and I just got to Japan, and I was on the verge of either was I going to get out or was I going to
Mm.
re-enlist, and a sergeant major pulled me to the side and asked me that same conversation. Had that similar conversation to what you had, and I re-enlisted, and that was probably one of the best decisions I made at that time, man. If we could talk a little bit about, we're gonna get into your flying airplanes now in a little bit. Tell us, where did Count come from? How did you get that call sign?
It's nothing crazy. In my first operational unit, everyone that knows me going all the way back to grade school, they know I love to laugh. And so my laugh has always been very hearty, like the Count from Sesame Street. And so even before people ever knew me in the Air Force, all my friends knew I had this hearty laugh. It just got a name tag to it when I came into the Air Force. The other part that I remember is I was the only Black pilot in my unit at the time. And so Count Chocula, like the cereal from back in the day, was another part of that meeting.
Got you, man.
Yeah.
So let's get into flying. Like I said, I was excited about this conversation because I've never actually spoken to a pilot to know what it's like to fly. So take our audience about how is it to fly? You fly an F-16. I want to tell us a little bit about all of the airplanes that you've flown. Tell us what it's like to fly. And if you can, tell us what challenges do you face when flying? Tell us a little bit about the responsibility of flying in regards to the people that's beside you. If you're flying with passengers, these types of things. What are some things that you're processing when you're actually flying an airplane? Because I know that this is a tremendous responsibility.
Yeah. And I have to say F-15, 15. Those F-16 guys are, but as far as, now this is going to sound crazy. Yeah. But I used to look at birds and always was curious, like what it looked like from that vantage point, being able to see everything from a God's eye view, what the view was from that perspective. And so I couldn't wait until I got into an airplane to actually this is what the birds are looking at. This is what it looks like from up above, and I can see everything. So I felt like, once I got that itch to fly, that it kind of allows me to be nosy and see everything. Mm-hmm. Like it's so boring just driving on a highway when I can only see this, just the trees or the sides of the road. I like to see what's out there. But I tell you, it's a lot more exhilarating than any roller coaster ride. It really is, man. And so it is a nonstop, real thrill ride in my humble opinion. And so not only to be able to, in a fighter jet, where if I'm sitting in a commercial plane, it may take me 20 minutes to get from sea level to 30,000 feet. In a fighter jet, dude, I can do that in a minute. And so it's just exhilarating to be able to have that power, that speed, to be able to just do something like climb straight vertical in the air and then get there. And once I'm there, dude, I can speed to the speed, faster than the speed of sound and get someplace super fast. So those things are super cool. The challenging things that come along with flying a fighter, you're the only pilot in the cockpit. You're, going to have to fly in formation with other aircraft. And so even though I'm in my own jet, we still fly as a team. We fly as a formation. And so you have to be synchronized. And I look at flying in a formation just like if you're a grunt and you have, you're on the battlefield, you rely just as much on the guy or girl to your left or right to keep you alive as much as they rely on you to do the same. It's the same thing when you're flying in a formation. If we're going down track or we're going out in bad enemy territory, I have to ensure that they're covering their area of responsibility as much as they're trusting me to cover my area of responsibility, because we don't need any blind zones, because one blind zone and one enemy that gets through can then impact and take out part of the formation, which, it impacts our whole effectiveness. So it's very similar in the jet as there are with troops on the ground and how you rely on one another. And so missions, not only flying whether it's daytime or nighttime, they can get complicated. And so in 30 seconds, I not only have to take off with a full complement of weapons, I have to then, wherever we're going can be hours away. It requires us to take on gas. And it could be pitch black, dark of night. And I have to take a four ship of formation into a black hole of darkness, meet and rejoin with a tanker that if we don't connect to, we will not get to our objective, which is probably another 2 hours away, all while not hitting each other, not hitting the tanker, and then being ready to fight and then come home, and land and get the aircraft on the ground safely. So it can be as complex as that. And trusting that, hey, my skills, my formation, my wingman, we all are going to be able to do exactly what we've been, tasked to do, but be able to get home safely.
Wow. Okay. Let's take this to another level, man, because you're operating under high stress, high pressure, but still remain positive, still remain calm, and even keel. Where does that come from?
People always say it goes back to training, but I look at it more than training. Every time I step in the jet, I tell people I have a vested interest to get my pink body back home. I want to get back to my son. I want to get back to my wife. And so the better I know how to do my job, the more confident I am about doing it, then the better I feel about my ability to get back. And so I would be nervous if I didn't study, if I didn't prepare for a mission. We may go out and the mission may take 8 hours total time from takeoff until we get back on the ground, but we might spend 48 hours preparing for that mission. The guys that are nervous are the guys that don't put in the time to prepare for a mission because they hadn't thought about almost every scenario. They hadn't thought through, all the different levels and the different phases of that mission. But if you've put the time in, then that really says how important you value not only getting there and being successful, but getting back. So you put in the time, and that's what you'll find that's why they say there are a lot of pilots that are type A personalities. They're confident because they put in the time to be good at their craft, the time to make them where they're sharp, their stress levels are relatively low, or at least they handle stress very well.
Mm-hmm. So you spoke earlier about missions, battles, and combat. Can you tell us a little bit about your time while you served? Did you experience any combat? What was it like to actually be in the fight? And what was that like for you in regards to like operating with your team, with your unit, and knowing that there's a greater purpose and a greater mission in regards to like what you're doing?
For the F-15C, I can tell you I've never taken the jet into combat.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that I've done is trained up to that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I say preparing for it is the closest thing you can do to combat, because you want to make sure when you're up for the game that you're ready and that you're not trying to get ready for the game when you're actually starting and on the front lines. So I can tell you preparation and all the training and all the flying, because we still fly here in peacetime. And the reason the F-15C hasn't been out there is because the mission that we do, which is basically, air superiority, primarily dogfighting, we haven't had an actual adversary that we've gone up against in such a long time that required us to use the aircraft for that specific reason.
So if you guys were to be called up to do something, what type of damage could you guys do?
I can say with the technology that we have, we do have the ability to probably see you before you see us. We have the ability to get there very quickly, and we have the ability to probably get weapons and missiles out before you get your missiles out. So before I ever even get close to you in a dogfighting arena, my plan is to at least have taken you out. And so if you do get within a visual range, as we would say, then I know my aircraft is pretty capable. But my goal is to make sure I don't see you. And if I do see you, then I know the machine that I got is going to be pretty capable, because it's a pretty bad dogfighting machine.
Wow. I know that you guys could do some damage, but I think you're being very modest a little bit too. I want to ask you something, man, in regards to, you said something that was very important that I think listeners should take from your story. When it comes to goals and achievements in life, I think some people think things are going to just happen just by happenstance and think it's just going to automatically happen just like that. And for yourself, it seems like preparation is key for you. It seems like guidance is keys for you and things like that. Can you talk a little bit about how do you look at things in life? How do you look at things throughout your career? How important is preparation for you? And can you take us through like your process when it comes to preparing for anything that you have set out to do for yourself, man?
Mindset is the first thing I'll say. Mindset is key, and that leads into your perspective on a lot. It goes back to never being said no by my parents to the things that I aspired or was passionate about doing. And I took that and I look at it, comparatively speaking, to every situation. And so when it came to, I'm trying to think of what's a good example. When it came to, let's say, getting that F-15C, and then how I translate, and I'll say how I translate that to life. I knew I needed to have at a minimum an 85 score or 85% on all my tests.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that when I took my flight check rides, I knew I wanted to get an excellent on every check ride, which means 4 downgrades or less.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, study wise, if there's time for me to study, then I need to be studying. And if it calls for me to study 7 days a week, then guess what I'm going to do? Study 7 days a week. And I did not leave it to chance or for me to say, oh man, you know what? I'm only going to study like 3 days this week because I don't feel like it. Well, then who could I blame if I didn't prepare enough for it? And then I score a 75% on that test when I left 4 days out there of opportunity and time that I could have prepared for it. And so I look at what is it that I want to do? What opportunity do I have to prepare for that thing or to get me better set up for that thing that I want to do? And it goes to like getting hired by United Airlines. I wanted to work for that company. It's like, okay, what do I need to do to work for that company? Well, I am going to need some recommendations. Okay, that one's a kind of easy one. I'm going to need to go and get, the commercial airline transport pilot certificate. Okay, what do I need to go do to get that? And then once I asked those questions and then I looked at what the answers were, then I knew it just took me going and seeking those answers or going through those particular tasks. So now that I'm qualified, now my reputation and everything else is going to precede me. So I look at life as, what is it that I want to do? Am I going to take myself out of the game and say, oh man, it's too hard or it's too difficult to do that? No, I'm not. My mindset is, if that's what I want to do, what is it that I need to accomplish to at least do that thing? And so many people don't have that mindset. A lot of times they will quit on something or they will never even try and never give themselves an opportunity. I always make sure I give myself an opportunity if it's something that I want to do, and I leave nothing to chance on the table.
I love that, man. Can you talk a little bit about going against status quo and then bucking against things that are the norm? Because you seem to choose to be the exception and go above and beyond when it seems to like greatness for yourself. Can you talk about a little bit about that within your mindset, as you just spoke about.
The thing I'm passionate about, more than flying is family. And so finding what your purpose is, and I say family, flying was that. When I say family, all encompassed in that bubble will be, my son, my wife, my mom and dad, my siblings. And so even though I wanted to fly, I looked at how could flying put me in a position to support my parents, to support, my wife and kid. And so it always was something that I looked at that was going to support my purpose. And so when I look at the things that I want to do for my parents, dude, that to me was like, I'm not going to let anything, get in the way. And I'm going to look at everything that's going to contribute to. Flying was one of the things. It opened up so many doors. It provided me, the job opportunity to support my mom and dad, to support my family. And I look at not only family as not only supporting, but me being in a position to be the role model for my son. And it takes more than just being a pilot or being a professional to be a role model. You got to have time. You got to have a presence of mind to be able to rear your child in a way that's going to set them up for success. I want my child to be independently thinking before he's even a teenager, so that I don't worry about him making smart choices, whether I'm around him or not.
Let's talk a little bit about family, man, because serving in the military, it could often be hard to start a family, be there for your family. As you know, that when you're serving, mission is usually like priority, and you're being called to do a whole bunch of things and stuff like that. Can you tell us a little bit about when you chose to start a family and have a wife and have a son? How important was those things for you to even get that started? And then can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you had to face when it came to like your job and the prioritizing some of those things, as you seem to manage that really well in regards to being a priority for your wife, being a priority for your son, being there for your mom and dad. Can you tell us a little bit about what was that like for you, and how did you like navigate to prioritize those things for yourself?
People first, mission always. People first, mission always. And people first encompasses your family, and that's your biological family. It includes your coworkers that you actually have a close relationship with, that you consider them family. Taking care of them, but not only saying it, but projecting it so that the people that you work for, the people that work for you, and the people that work with you, they see that and they understand that. And so I say that because as I got up in rank, I always made it a point to make sure I communicate, what my priorities are. And that doesn't negate why I'm in the military. I know you're in the military for the business of fighting wars and defending, if it all comes down to that. Right. But in the times that you're not doing that, you should make sure it's clearly understood what your priorities are. People first. And so when it came to me now supervising and leading, I wanted to make sure I clearly communicated that expectation. Hey, I am married. I am going to be here for you, but realize I do have a family just like you have a family. And I want to make sure your expectations on me is realistic as my expectations on you. And I made it a point to take care of the people in my organization because I wanted them to understand that I was human and I understand that they're human. And that whenever they had issues, I truly did have an open door policy that, hey, if you got a problem and it's family, people related, I'm willing to assist you, because at the end of the day, it's going to be a detriment to the organization if you're not here, and you could cause something safety related to happen because you're not mentally there. So I want to take care of you when it comes to helping you as a person. And so I took that not only as a supervisor and as a commander, and I preached it, I lived it, And so that culture was the culture that I built. And ultimately, the mission, it definitely took care of itself because people felt like they were in a safe work environment, that the person that they worked for and with truly had their best interest in mind. So I navigate my people that way, and I lived my life that way in the military later on, to where it was never misunderstood. When I had to take time away from my kid, hey, my organization was empowered enough to continue running because they knew I trusted them, and they respected the fact that, hey, I'm going to be human, and they gave me the time that I needed a way to do that. So it allowed me to keep that perspective always in my organization.
Most definitely, man. If you could talk about something that I think was important for what you just spoke about, when it was like developing that culture within your environment. And for me, the word that stood out for me was leadership. Can you talk to me a little bit about what does it look like to be an effective leader where troops can follow you, listen to you, and still be there for you whenever time or things hit the fan? Because it seems like that's the environment that you created. So talk a little bit about what is it like to be an effective leader?
So I can't expect more of my people than what they expect of me. Granted, as a leader, you're going to be out front. You're going to be the one that are going to be charged with making the majority of decisions. But I need to have people that I've empowered and that I've entrusted to also do those things. And so, as an effective leader, I communicate my expectations, but at the same time, I try to make sure I empower people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I look at it this way: leadership similar to the head of an organization. If I had to step out from my seat, would my organization survive or would my organization fail? If my organization failed because I am not there sitting in that position, then I didn't do enough to train my people. I didn't do enough to empower my people. And I didn't trust my people enough to continue with the organization. And that's how I looked at leading. I need to trust my people. I need to train them enough to where they understand what the task is, even if I am not here. And I need to also trust that when I'm not there, that the ship will keep sailing and it will stay down track. And so, in a simple sense, that's what leadership is training, empowering, and leading your people and trusting them. And so, if you look at it from that perspective, you should not feel like you're the most important person in an organization and that it will fail without you. If you do, then you're failing to lead.
I love that, man. You mentioned earlier that while you were on your path and on your journey, the base commander pulled you to the side, and that's someone that's seen something inside of you. And it may have happened before, but that seems to be one of the stories that stuck out for you. Can you talk a little bit about how important it is to have people that are in your corner and has a vested interest in you? So can you elaborate about mentorships or people that mentor you and help guide you? And then can you talk about it from the aspect also of how you are mentoring other people and coaching people too as well?
Yeah. It's a lot of military leaders that you see in certain positions, they would not have gone there, or at least they would not have gotten there without someone at least providing them either a pathway or someone exposing them to the opportunity or at least the requirements to even be in that position.
Mm-hmm.
And so if a lot of military leaders think that they can get certain places without the mentorship or without the guidance of other people, they are sadly mistaken. Sadly mistaken. And at the end of the day, what is it? It's networking. It's networking.
Yeah.
And so having a mentor is crucial to talk about paths that you just had not tread. You know, it's hard for you to go and tread a path that you know nothing about. It's hard for you to work in a circle that you have no exposure to. You know, I didn't learn about what a wing commander and what a base commander or a general did until I worked for one and directly for one, and I saw them in the process. Mm-hmm. That opened me up to a whole realm of leadership that I had never experienced. But I would not have seen that had I not at least had a mentor, at least in a position that could expose me to that. And so it's important to understand and realize that. It's not saying that you need to go and kiss someone's behind, no, but being able to have someone that's in a different position above you that you can go to, and that it's a two-way communication street that they can teach you, dude, that can be priceless when it comes to you wanting to get to that level or go on. And then now I talked about from that seat, now I'm almost a person in that seat.
Right.
And so when I see inexperienced people or young people that want to be a pilot, or they want to command, or they want to lead, or they honestly just don't know what it is that they want to do, then I think it's important for me to now impart what I've learned to them. Because if they only make decisions in a vacuum of other young people that still know nothing, then that's not at least increasing their opportunity to move into a different position. So I try to pay it back and then try to expose those to the things that I've learned. So it's important for, the old adage, you can't be it if you don't see it. It's kind of in line with that. So trying to be that person that people see so that they want to be, or they want to aspire to something else, they have that to fall back on. So I do that still today, man.
Absolutely, man. You've accomplished so many things in your life throughout your career. What has been some of the most profound moments that, looking back at it, man, what has been some of the most profound moments that has stuck out to you, man?
Best job is commanding. And commanding because there is a legal responsibility to it. Once you get into the position where they give you a government or G series order where what I say, I can be legally bound to it. I can go to jail. I can get, charged with giving an illegal order. That's a lot of responsibility, but it is also a privilege. And so taking that, and then now that you're in that position where you have that level of responsibility, seeing the ability to influence and guide others. I'd never had any bigger influence than when I was in that seat, because you impacted people's progression. And sometimes not from the seat or perspective that people might be thinking like, oh, you allow them to do. No, I saw someone that had the potential to become a senior NCO. And I'm like, hey, have you considered going to this school? Because I see you setting yourself up for this next job if you go to this school, and you got the leadership potential. And so it's things like that where I can set folks up, and I've been able to set folks up to then progress in their career. And so having that level of influence, or seeing someone that I recommend for either another command position, and being able to make that recommendation and talk directly with another unit to say, I definitely recommend this guy, and I think they're the person that you should hire. So it was awesome to be able to do those things from that seat. And while you're trying to take care of people's careers, you're also taking care of people mentally, emotionally, and personally, because there are a lot of problems that people were dealing with that previous supervisors, they just worried about the mission, but they never cared about their people. And so it was awesome being able to take care of some people that had personal problems, and then having them come back and thank me for it, and realizing that I just thought I was doing what was in their best interest. In actuality, they just looked for a leader to kind of take care of them, and not understanding that at the end of the day, I was really trying to take care of them. And so it was heartwarming to be able to have someone come back and appreciate a lot of that stuff. So commanding was awesome.
What did the military teach you about yourself? Looking back at your career and seeing all that you've accomplished, man, what did it teach you about Alex?
I had a lot more leadership potential than I had originally expected, and that I could lead on a bigger scale than what I had ever expected as well. And I say lead. I look at the Black community. I look at our community. It's not something that is prominently taught. And sometimes leadership can't be taught. It has to be something that, you kind of have that knack to do. And so it's not an environment where, when I think about growing up, that I had a lot of opportunities to do that. And so I was given some opportunities in college. I was given some opportunities when I first came into the military, but I was given way more opportunity. And that's the thing that I take away from the military, that it actually provided a lot of opportunity to do. I took that and I took it to my family as a whole, and not just my immediate family, but cousins, aunts, uncles. When we're places, sometimes they always say, "Oh, are you bringing the militant out now, Alex?" And it's not that I'm bringing the militant out. It's I see an opportunity where it's like, okay, we can do this a little bit more effectively. We can do this more efficiently. And I try to keep my mouth closed until it just seems it's like, all right. And so sometimes it does take that. And crazily enough, sometimes I see my family might lean on that. They're like, all right, Alex, can you help us with this situation? And so that just, leadership comes in all different forms, but just that ability to do things easily and not really make a big deal about it or get stressed about it. So, yeah.
Absolutely, man. So family is big and key to you. When you joined, they supported you and they're there with you along the way. Can you talk a little bit about now? They've seen you retire and they've seen you accomplish this big goal that you set out for. Can you talk a little bit about like how do they embrace you? How do they look at you? How do they celebrate with you? And just to seeing you like cross the finish line and accomplish the goal that you set out that you was going to do. Tell us a little bit about like what is it for mom? What is it like for dad? What is it like for your wife? What is it for like your son? Tell us about what that experience has been like for you, man.
Um, my dad, as recently as like a week ago, he was here staying with us, keeping our son. Um, and we went to my son's school, and I did a presentation for my son's school and everything. And the teachers were super like appreciative. And then now they were telling my dad, who went with me, he started tearing up when he was listening to this. And so to this day, he still is super proud, man. And where I don't get caught off guard anymore, but to the point where it just makes him emotional to see like what I've done, where I've gone. And so for my mom and dad, man, it still makes them proud. As recently as, like I said last week, to where they tear up just at the fact that I'm still alive, yes, but I've gotten to do a lot of what I wanted to do and be successful at it. And they couldn't have been any prouder, man. As far as my son, he's 4. Um, I don't think he sees it in that light yet. Um, but the thing that I will take away from him is I feel that he trusts and he feels safe around dad, because that's just the time that I've always put with him. And when we're out, what I project when I'm with him is something that I can tell he feels. There's a different sentiment when he's around dad than when he's not. And so that makes me proud. And so I try to make sure I keep that whole environment for him, and he understands that. So if as he grows into a man or a teenager, if there's one thing I hope he recalls, it's like, man, dad, I always knew I felt a certain way when you were around. And if he can recall that, then that's the thing that I look forward to hearing, hopefully one day, if he realizes it.
Good deal. So you came from a small town, but you've gotten to see the entire world, to see things from a different perspective. And I think that's often something that's missing within kids growing up or within people that's come from like small community or disadvantaged communities and things like that. Can you talk about the importance of what it was like for you, or the importance of taking a chance, or the importance of like betting on yourself, the importance of exploring other cultures and things like that? Because I could hear and I could see, and I know a good bit about you in regards to like how that has changed your life. Can you talk a little about the importance of that?
Definitely. Firstly, I wanted to live overseas when I joined the military. I couldn't join the military and expect to stay home. So I wanted to live outside of where I grew up. Um, that being said, you can be halfway around the world and people will have actually similar situations as you. The only thing is you get to see it from a different perspective. Culture may be different, language may be different, but a lot of people are still human beings and adults. And so by moving around the world, you get to experience that, hey, this bubble I live in is not, the most important thing, or not the only experience that's happening in my world. There's so many other people that have similar struggles. Not only that, also respecting the differences, because a lot of people get so caught up in just their community and their experience that they neglect to even acknowledge other cultures and other experiences. And so it's made me very respectful, very unassuming when it comes to dealing with people in general. And so that is the thing that three things I try to impart on my son, that I try to live. I try to be considerate of all people, which allows me to empathize with their situation without even knowing. I try to be respectful of people, and so everyone's gonna have a blanket garner of respect until you give me otherwise. And then always being independently thinking, being able to make my own decision without being influenced by others, but make my decision based on the body of information that I've received. And I try to impart those things to my son as young as he is now. And so being and moving out in the world allowed me to more readily accept those things, being considerate, being respectful, and independently thinking.
Thank you for sharing that, man. So you're getting ready to transition, man, and do some big things that I know that's coming here. A lot of veterans, when they get out and they transition, some do not have a plan and they struggle. And that often leads to some of these things that we see veterans struggle with now today. And that leads to mental health problems, homelessness, that leads to unemployment, and so many things. Can you talk a little bit about what is it like for you now transitioning? What are some of like your goals? What are some of the things that helped you throughout your transition process? And then as you share that, can you give some advice in regards to some of the veterans that may be out there that's listening to this podcast that's struggling? And what are some things that can help them with their transition?
Definitely. I will admit I've known two military members personally that have taken their own lives, sadly. And I only know of two personally, and that's just in a sea of other individuals that has happened more often than we care to see and what we'd like to see. Um, Now, for that transition for me, um, I've been planning to retire for like 4 years, Mike. so, so I've been excited about it. And what I tell people is, um, I look at my retirement as the beginning of a new chapter. Don't look at it as the end of don't look at it as the end of a career or the end of your military life. Look at it as the beginning of something else. And so, lady, she's not looking at me. Oh, so I look at it as the beginning of chapter 2 and the beginning of something else. And the thing that still guides me is family. When I talk about family, I look at what is it that I want to do to still allow me to take care of my parents, to still allow me to have time with my son, to be the father and to be the parent. And so I made sure that chapter 2 was going to allow me to still do those things for my family. And that's what drove me. Now, how to handle that from an emotional perspective for the folks that don't. One thing I talked about at my retirement, and I shed a lot of tears at my retirement ceremony, is the fact that I was able to be open to people to actually show that emotion. And then a lot of the people that I invited there were friends that when I had gone through some tough times, I was able to lean on, and they became some of the closest friends. And so I spoke to them about being vulnerable to admit when you have tough times, being vulnerable to actually talk about it, but also trusting people that you can go to with situations you have. I know I've talked about a lot of positive stuff now, but I've had some dark times, throughout all of that are sprinkled in throughout there. And through those tough times, I've had people that I trusted that I can go to, that I know I've shed many tears and many nights on their couch. But being able to go to someone that I could feel safe to do that. And so, not to be too proud to where you're unwilling to talk to somebody. And just talking to somebody doesn't mean it has to be a therapist. It doesn't mean it has to be a professional. It can be a friend or even someone that you feel you trust enough to at least listen to what it is that you have to say. So be vulnerable to admit you have something like that, and try to have someone in your corner. And it doesn't have to be a professional friend that you can go to.
Absolutely, man. I wanted to elaborate a little bit as we get ready to wrap up here. So, as I've noticed throughout life, as things have changed for me, I noticed that the same people that I started with on my journey with a lot of things, they're no longer with me now.
Mm.
And that's just part of the evolution of life with lots of things and stuff like that. And some have stuck around. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of having the right people around you, supporting you along your journey, along your path, as there's going to be good times, there's going to be bad times, there's going to be people that's in your corner that's going to be supporting you and be there for you. Just choosing the right people to be in your circle that's going to be there for you, to keep you accountable, keep you responsible, but still there pushing you along because they want to see you successful.
Mm. You said accountable. I'll say your friends should be your accountability partners.
Mm-hmm.
And so should your spouse or your significant other. Someone that's going to tell you what you need to hear, not necessarily what you want to hear. In the same breath, if you have people that aren't that, in that whenever you speak to things that you want to do or speak to things that you're planning on doing, are they supportive? Do they listen? Or are they actually a naysayer? And so the biggest thing that's gonna like put a dream out is someone that's gonna be there to discount you, to tell you you can't do it, or just say all the negative things are gonna be counter to what it is that you're trying to do. And so anyone that's not in support of what your desire is, what your passion is, then you should look at them with a grain of salt, and you should take their, not only their criticism, but their advice with a grain of salt, especially if it's not going to be towards what your overall end state is. And so in the beginning, when I was younger and I wanted to fly, I had some friends that they thought I was kind of crazy and stupid for wanting to do something like that. And I kept them around for a while. But I can tell you, within 10 years of that, I stopped speaking to them because I knew I wanted to do bigger and better things. And they just were an energy that was just counter to everything that I wanted to do. And I ultimately got to do those things. But I only imagine, like, if I kept having those people in my ear saying that thing, would it have made it easier? And I definitely know it would not have. And so people that are just completely counter to what I want to do. And then when I got, obviously got married, had my son, I look at the father that I want to be, and I look at who's going to be around to provide the environment for my son. Am I going to be around people that are going to be a detractor from the parent that I am trying to be to him? Or are people going to also be supportive and doing similar things? So I found a different circle of fathers that are very similar when it comes to what they think about rearing their child or their children. And so having circles of people, like you said, with the same mindset,
Mm-hmm.
or people that's going to support your aspirations is crucial. Is critical and crucial is what I'm trying to say.
Absolutely, man. As men, I know often we grow up in some environments where we are told to be tough. We're told to not share certain types of emotions. And oftentimes that affects us as we carry that baggage with us, and it leads to like some like limited beliefs. It leads to some imposter syndrome. It leads to behaviors that we tend to carry out either at a certain point in our lives, but or when we get to be an adult. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of being vulnerable, or maybe so either as a man or as a African American man, or just in certain types of environments or situation? But just talk a little bit about the importance of being vulnerable and being transparent when you're faced with adversity or when you're faced with challenges and things like that. As you mentioned before, right? You've been through some tough times in your life.
Mm.
Can you talk a little bit about that? And if you want to share any adversities or challenges that you may have faced and how doing some of those things have helped you get past those situations within your life?
Yep. Kids, they learn from their parents.
Mhm.
And so you and I probably grew up in an era where our parents or maybe even adults say, hey, boys don't cry. Why are you crying? You need to toughen it out. And there is some truth to some of that. But when it comes to, I look at my son, he's a tough cookie, but I don't tell him that he can't express something if he gets hurt or if he's sad. You know, I want him to understand, and I ask him, why are you sad? And I let him express what it is, because the better off he understands how he feels and what's coming out, the better he can communicate it and the better he can deal with his feelings. If you're always with a child forcing them to suppress something that they don't quite understand, that's going to lead into an adult that don't know how to express themselves and how to at least get their emotions out in a way that's going to be healthy. Um, and so as an adult, I understand that. I realize that. And I don't, when I was in situations, I was married before. And I can tell you that was one of the toughest, getting divorced. That was one of the toughest things that I had to deal with, especially during the time that I was going through the military. So much so that it emotionally impacted my ability to feel safe when I was flying with students. So much so I had to take myself out of the cockpit for a while because I couldn't focus, and I felt like I was going to be distracted so that I was going to allow someone to kill me.
Mm.
And so I had to, I understood that enough so that I went to my commander and say, hey, sir, I just need to tell you straight up, this is what I'm dealing with. And for me to just express that truth to him, he completely was open to allow me to deal with that because he understood the significance of it. And so it made me realize that the better I can communicate the truth of what's going on to the people that it really mattered to, the better off they can be in a position to actually help me. And I
Right.
translated that to whether it's your commander, whether it's your spouse, or whether it's your friend, because what also talking about it does, it allows you to put that issue right in front of you, and it helps you think about it. And in some instances, it helps you now address it. And so it doesn't help anyone to keep your problems inside. You have to at least get it out, whether it's to a friend or a professional. And being vulnerable really is looking out for what's going to help you.
Wow. So, Alex, how is it that you maintain like your mental health, your emotional well-being in the face of adversity and all of the challenges now? Because we know that things happened to you in the past, but there's going to be more to come here in the future,
Mm,
tomorrow, next week, next year.
mm.
How do you handle some things for yourself like that?
Um, so I will say there are two things. The simple thing that I do is I do exercise. I feel like my ability to physically, be able to handle things helps me take on a little bit more outside from a physical and an emotional sense.
Mhm.
The other thing, not to use French or profanity like that, but I call it my fuck it factor, is what I would say. Um, and to explain that, I tell you that I don't live with regrets because the things that I can impact and that I can affect, I try to do. Um, I also understand in that light, there are things outside of my control. And the things that are outside of my control, I don't spend time stressing over it. And that's where I say my fuck it factor. if I do everything that I can do towards something, but that there's something that's outside of my control that impacts that thing and it keeps something from happening, why stress over it when it's something I had no control over? Some people stress out about so many things that's outside of their control. And so that leads to my fuck it factor. And then it, it and just to wrap it up when it comes to that, I know that there's only so much time in a day that I can put an effort towards something. And I do know that there is a point that it is counterproductive for me to do anything else. And so once I reach that point, and it's up to the individual, but once I reach a point where it's being counterproductive to my effort, that my efforts are putting in to achieve success, then I say that's about the limit, but I know where that is.
Right, right. I think that alleviates so much anxiety and stress too, as well. Once you've already set the bar for yourself in regards to where things are, so once it hits that factor for you, then
Yeah, man.
yeah, man. So, all right, man, you are an advocate for community empowerment, leadership. You've shared your story of all of your accomplishments, man. You faced some tough times in the service, but also persevered and seen through some of those things. For the listeners that's listening to your story, that is inspired by your story, can you share some lessons, some takeaways from your life, from your story, that they could impart into their lives, man?
Yes. I'm all about helping community. And I say our community. And I say that not as me negating any other community, but I think it's important to know that if we don't at least come together as, teaming up, partnering up as a community, then it's hard for us to expect other communities to do for us of what we're unwilling to do for ourselves.
Exactly.
And so I'm super passionate about that. And so I take everything that I've done in the military when it comes to flying, and I try to always take what I've learned and bring it back to the community. So much so that there are things that I want to do business wise, financial wise, so that I can put more financial stability and economics in our community and teach people how to do those things so that they can in turn do the same thing. That is the one thing that people fail to see, is that economics is very influential when it comes to what happens around you.
All right.
And if we have a small portion of the economics that's impacting our community, then it's very little we can actually influence. And so I look at that important wise. Also, the thing that I want to say too is it always is said that, Black people have to work 2 and 3 times harder to achieve something, which is true. I'm going to be the first one to admit it is true. But what I want people to really not think is that should be the norm. I'm not saying everybody should work hard. I'm not saying that we need to be lazy. That is not what I'm advocating at all. But what I'm saying is, what is providing that environment that requires you as a Black person to work 3 times harder to be successful? It's the environment, or it's the people that are running that environment. And we should not be accepting of that. So when we tell people it's the norm that they should always work 3 times harder to be successful, then that means we're accepting the environment that provides that. And so I look at it as, I want us, if we find ourselves in an environment that is requiring that, what is wrong with that environment? Why do I need to prove that I am 3 times better to be equal to? And so that's the challenge that I set out, and I want people to really think about. And so to get below the surface of working 3 times harder, try to change your environment. And that's where, if we then now have more economic impact, we can create the environment where we shouldn't be scrutinized, 2 or 3 times as hard just because we look differently.
Man, that was so empowering, man. I want to applaud you for saying that. That means a lot. Hopefully, our listeners took the nuggets out of that message that you just laid out for us, man. Alex, man, brother, thank you so much for coming on the show, being a guest, sharing your story. I really enjoyed this conversation, man. It's been a pleasure, brother.
And it was definitely a pleasure. So I appreciate the opportunity. I sincerely mean that, my friend.
Thank you, man. So if anybody wanted to get a hold of you, reach out to you from this conversation, or they want to get you on their podcast, how can they find you, man?
You can reach me on LinkedIn. That is what I use primarily. So it's under Alex Edwards. It'll be Alex Count Edwards with my call sign in the middle. Or you can email me at the letter O, the number 1, Alex C. Edwards at gmail.com. And that's O1 Alex C. Edwards at gmail.com. Just reach out and you can find me there.
Thank you, Alex. Well, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation, learned a whole lot from Alex's story in regards to how he persevered and made it all the way through some challenges within his life. Make sure you leave a comment, but most importantly, make sure you share this with a family or a friend and a loved one. Until next time, God bless.
Can't complain at all. Couple dollars in my pocket, no income and go. Been working on my body, getting healthier. Thank God for clarity.